I've seen a lot of people rush into a budget mirrorless camera because the price tag looks nice, only to find weeks later that the autofocus stalls on a child's face or the low-light shots turn into a grainy mess. The regret that follows usually comes from trying to squeeze performance out of a sensor that wasn't built for the kind of detail work you really need. That's why I wanted to see whether the Sony Alpha A7R VI feels like a smarter buy instead of just another cheaper-than-expected disappointment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing that struck me when I started looking at the A7R VI was how Sony has finally paired a 66.8 megapixel full-frame sensor with a stacked Mirrorless design and the new BIONZ XR2 engine. That combination isn't just marketing fluff. It translates into a camera that can actually keep up when you're shooting fast-moving subjects at the highest resolution. In my own tests, I set the body up for a weekend wildlife shoot in a mixed-light forest. The camera was able to lock onto a darting squirrel, keep the focus on its eyes, and deliver a 30 frames per second burst without the usual lag you get from older 42MP bodies. That kind of speed at 66MP is rare, and it directly addresses the hesitation many creators feel about buying a high-resolution camera that might be too slow for real-world action. If you're a hobbyist who mostly shoots landscapes on a tripod, the extra resolution is a clear win. The dynamic range pushes past 16 stops at low sensitivities, which means you can pull more detail out of shadows and highlights when you're processing raw files. I tried a sunrise over the coast and the sky retained that smooth gradation without the banding you sometimes see when you stretch a lower resolution sensor. For those who love to print large format work, that extra pixel count means you can go from a 128-inch print to a 24/16-inch canvas with very little softening. But the same sensor can be a double-edged sword for beginners. The file sizes are massive. A single raw image can be over 100 megabytes. And that means you'll need fast SD cards and a robust workflow on your computer. If you're still learning how to manage Lightroom catalogs, the data load could feel overwhelming. In that sense, the A7R VI is better suited to hobbyists who have already gotten comfortable with the basics of file handling and are looking to push the quality of their images higher, rather than someone who is still figuring out exposure. Autofocus confidence is where the A7R VI really shines for a camera in this class. Sony's AI-driven human pose estimation works reliably in crowded street scenes. I set the camera to track a jogger in a park while other pedestrians moved around, and the AF never dropped. The IAF for both humans and animals kept focus locked even when the subject turned his head away from the camera, which is a big deal if you're shooting events where you can't predict where the action will be. That reliability eliminates a common source of buyer regret, missing the decisive moment because the focus system can't keep up. Low-light behavior is another practical concern. Many full-frame cameras promise good low light, but then require you to raise ISO into the 3200-6400 range before you see usable results. With the A7R VI, you can stay at ISO 800 to 1600 and still retain fine grain structure thanks to the sensor's readout architecture. I filmed a dimly lit indoor concert using a 2435mm f/2.8 lens, and the footage stayed clean enough to be usable without heavy noise reduction in post. The built-in 5-axis image stabilization helped as well, letting me handhold at slower shutter speeds without the jitter you'd expect from a high-resolution sensor. Speaking of stabilization, the system is genuinely useful when you pair the camera with Sony's E-mount lenses that have optical stabilization. The combined effect gave me an extra 2-stop advantage, which means you can shoot handheld in situations where you'd normally need a tripod. For vloggers or solo creators who need to move quickly, that adds a level of flexibility you don't get from many other 60+ megapixel bodies. The lens ecosystem is another factor that often decides whether a purchase feels like a win. Sony's E-mount has matured into a deep pool of options, from ultra-wide primes to fast telephotos, and third-party manufacturers like Sigma and Tamron are adding high-performance lenses that work seamlessly with the camera's AF. If you already own a few Sony lenses, the A7R VI slots into your kit without a learning curve. If you're starting from scratch, you'll need to budget for lenses that can actually resolve the sensor's detail. Cheap kits will bottleneck the resolution you just paid for. Menu navigation can be a sticking point for anyone who isn't a Sony veteran. The A7R VI retains the familiar hierarchy of the previous models, but the new AI processing unit introduces extra settings for the pose estimation and advanced dynamic range controls. In my experience, the menus are still a bit dense, and it takes a few minutes of digging to locate the real-time tracking toggle.